Please join me in welcoming Amir Korangy, publisher of The Real Deal, the most influential trade publication in our industry. I know that I check The Real Deal sometimes, many times a day, depending on the current gossip. But Amir published the first edition of The Real Deal out of his home in 2003 and has since grown it into one of the premier business magazines in the country with a dedicated focus on New York, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles. Amir, welcome.
Thank you so much, Bess.
Thank you for joining us today.
I love the quality of all of this, and this whole production of this. It's great.
Yeah, it's fun. We're having a great time with it. Well, We're excited to hear from you today. So I'm going to get right into it. I have a lot of questions for you, and hopefully this is going to be a really lively conversation.
Okay, let's do it.
Fasten your seatbelt, Amir. You ready?
I'm in.
Okay. So given the fact that you have been in real estate media for nearly 2 decades, how have you seen the media landscape change over the years?
Well, it's funny. This is something that we talk about all the time. And, if I was in the publishing business in the 1970s or 80s, I wouldn't have to change my business model for 40 years. And if it was even older than that, I wouldn't have to change my business model for a longer period. Just in the last 10 years or last 7 years, we've had, as a media company, we've had to change our business model 3 times. And the changes come at a faster pace. And how you used to function as a media company was that you put out content and you got people who believed that people were interested in that content and they would advertise next to it or above it or below it or part of it. And now that keeps changing. And how you monetize content continues to change, and in different formats and different ways. And as a media company, you constantly have to shift and adapt to that. And I've never had to, for the first, I've had The Real Deal for 18 years now. And for the first 10 years, I literally didn't have to change anything. All I had to do was focus on the core of the business. And I was happy with that. And now we continually, every couple of years, we have to change the business model. And that, in effect, what that does is that the people that you hire change. I mean, outside of the core, right? Like, so your editors and reporters, you always want journalists because that's what we do. We put out news. But for the rest of it, for the operations and for the marketing of it, and for distribution, for everything else, you're constantly looking for different positions. There's so many new positions out there. And, I teach at Columbia and I lecture at NYU, and I tell those guys that right now there's so many great opportunities for young people to go into companies and create value for themselves and have titles, like significant titles, because people need people with that who are interested in that kind of work to come in and work there. And the fact of the matter is that, universities are not they're not changing as fast as they need to sort of teach this stuff at the school. So it's not like I need a social media director. Oh, this guy went to Harvard social media, let me hire them. That just doesn't exist. And these folks are coming into the market and they're getting the higher salaries. And even though they only have like 2 years or 3 years experience, they're getting these 6-figure salaries that are not available to somebody who's doing a position that was, that's been around for 20, 30 years. And that's what we're dealing with as a company, and especially as a media company, because we're sort of part of that change in some way.
Yeah, the level of acceleration it's very hard to keep up with. I mean, the appetite for real estate news has never been stronger and more people are just hungry for it everywhere. Yet it seems like there's very few places to get that. And I wonder, what do you attribute that to?
Well, it's a specialty thing and it's expensive, right? So if you write about finance, you could have 50 reporters in New York City write about finance, and that news, that content would be relevant to the rest of the country. But if for real estate is a local phenomenon, right? So like I have 50 reporters in New York City writing about Miami and San Francisco and all these places. I have to have people on the ground to do that. So a lot of media companies can't afford to do that. They just don't get the returns for it, and it's not worth the effort because you're asking for sort of specialty reporting, niche reporting. And then for us, luckily, our core business is to create real estate content, real estate news. We have the largest real estate newsroom in the country, I think in the world. I don't think other core organization, media organization, has as many reporters and editors focusing just on real estate news, which is what we have. And so that's allowed us to sort of surpass a lot of other media companies. I mean, for the New York Times, the real estate section was the highest grossing section for the New York Times. But in 2000, after the recession, they shut down the real estate section, and they never really tried to revamp it. They didn't want to allocate any sort of reporters or journalists to cover that side of the business, which was great for us because we tend to get a lot of those readers who are interested in that content they used to have.
Yep, you're right. It's interesting. I mean, the Real Deal covers politics as well, since real estate and politics are obviously very linked. What do you think of the most recent New York City elections with ranked choice voting? And what do you think about Eric Adams being, the guy? What is your opinion about that?
It's funny. I was meeting with this guy about a year and a half ago, and I was really worried about the city. At that point, de Blasio was full out. He didn't care at that point. He was let it all fall where it may. And I was we really don't have any real candidates for it. And I was trying to get him to support, we were trying to come up with some sort of a leader for the city. The city didn't have any leaders. It had all these sort of, everyday sort of run-of-the-mill politicians running. And he was what about Eric Adams? Have you met Eric Adams? I was I don't even know who that is. He was he's the Brooklyn Borough president. You should meet him. I met with him. And he had so much knowledge about real estate. He had actually put in the work to find out every 100,000 square feet of commercial office space employs this many people to just manage and maintain the building. And he had done all this research on the importance of real estate to the city. And I really liked him, and I thought he was going in the right direction. He was the first guy to actually be no, real estate is our friend, and which in fact it is. I mean, real estate, is the largest tax basis for the entire city. It's whatever you want to do, you want to increase that, but you want to support that. You don't want to. You don't want to sort of disrupt it or try to slow it down, which the last administration, the de Blasio administration, tried to do, and it hurt the city, I think, in a significant way. And I thought that he came in with the right attitude, and I love that the voters recognized that and acknowledged that too. But with the ranked choice voting, it's hard enough to vote for any election. It's you have to pick a party, they make it, it's not easy to vote. And, to do the ranked choice voting, I found it to be difficult. It took me a couple of tries to understand exactly how it works. But I'm just thinking about your everyday voter, and are they going to put in the effort to understand how that works? And I don't think that's the case. You have a city of 8.5 million people, and less than 9% of the population is voting. So you have 9% of the population voting for the mayoral race. For somebody who's going to most likely be in charge of this city, the largest city in America, for the next 8 years, possibly 12 years, and in charge of one of the largest budgets in the city. You got $100 billion budget. That's a budget of Pfizer or some major tech company that's out there. And you could any schmo could sort of win that election and be running $100 billion budget. If as a citizen of New York, you're a shareholder of New York City. So, and who do you want to manage that money for you? I mean, obviously, social issues are important. I don't think anybody would become the mayor of New York not addressing social issues, which are important. But to throw everything else in the wind and say that, hey, we're just defund the police and we're going to tax the rich and we're going to do all this stuff. It's not thoughtful. Policy to just be we're going to take this group of people and just tax them to death until they no longer want to be here. And that was sort of de Blasio's attitude, and he didn't care. I don't know if you guys saw, but about a month ago, he sent out a tweet that had 3 words in it, but it was just horrible. His tweet was "tax the rich." It was on the other side of the spectrum of a Donald Trump tweet. Right, so he had those crazy tweets, and he is on this side of the spectrum, tweeting "tax the rich," in one of the richest cities in the country, possibly in the world, and he's sort of attacking the largest tax bases of the city.
Yeah, I mean, Amir, it has been, in my opinion, a failure of leadership. We've had this sort of politics that's been or, like the tyranny of the or. It's either this or that, as opposed to being an and leader where we say we're pro real estate and we're pro affordable housing, and we need to come together and figure out solutions for the most vulnerable and work with our business community. And I think that's what Eric Adams brings, you know.
Yeah, and the problem is that, like with our politics today, is that the only way you can sort of argue against the right now, you have to be on the far left. There is no room in the middle, which is most of us are in the middle. Right. Most of us, we find value, conservative values, you know, that are appealing, and we find liberal values that are appealing, and we want some sort of a combination. It's not like I have to be on this side of the spectrum or I am on the other side, you know, like, and I don't think anybody is like that. I don't think anybody functions that like I'm 100% conservative, I'm 100% liberal. And that, unfortunately, those are the choices we have to make. We have to say, if we're not 100% conservative, we have to be 100% liberal. And there is no room for the Mitt Romneys of the world, you know, who are just like sort of in the middle, and they're like, you know, I sort of like to see all of it work together, you know.
No, I mean, it's compromise. John Meacham is quoted as saying, you know, compromise is the oxygen of democracy. And it truly is. And we have to hopefully get back to that in New York City. What do you see as being one of the largest challenges facing the mayor on day one? What do you think is the number one thing to focus on?
Well, you know, all these things with the tech crime and education, all of those things, at the end of the day, as a mayor and as a city, what we want is for people to want to come to New York City. The success of a mayor, the success of a city, is to see the population go up. That's the number one measure that we want as a city. It's like, do people want to come to New York City? And to create that, you have to have good education, you have to have good infrastructure, and, you know, a decent tax system and things like that. But I think he has to sort of attack all of those things at the same time, because a lot of them have gone, you know, all these things, even the good things that de Blasio wanted to do, he couldn't achieve them. I mean, here's a guy who, he increased all these taxes, the city council increased all these taxes, the state increased all these taxes to generate $4 billion more in taxes. That's about 4% of the entire budget of the city. You run a business, you know that if you had to create 4%, so that you don't scare off your biggest clients and your best employees, you would go into your budget and rework it and say, okay, I'm going to come up with this $4 billion to somewhere in the budget, so I don't have to have this bad publicity that New York City and New York State are raising their taxes. Because look, at the end of the day, it's not that much. It's a quarter of a point here, half a point there. But the way it scares people, you talk to people about New York City, they're like, oh, the taxes have gone up so crazy there, and it's, you know, you can't live there. And that's not the fact. You know, it's gone up by less than a half a point here and less than a quarter point there. Look, it all adds up. But if I had the choice of saying, do I want to deal with this bad publicity across the country saying that New York City is raising their taxes, or have the positive publicity of saying, like, I'm going to rework the budget somehow, starting not giving my wife $1.8 billion to sort of throw away with nothing to show for it. That's like half of it, right? So imagine if those mistakes could be wiped out, not even all of them, just like half of them. If half of those mistakes and those bad budget decisions could be wiped out, you don't have to increase the taxes. You know, taxes aren't the issue. We want good streets, we want good schools, we want money to go to all this stuff. The problem is that they keep increasing the taxes and nothing's improving. You know, crime is going up, our education, we pay more for education than anywhere else in the country, and it's one of the worst education programs in the country. There's no reason for that. You have this much money to put towards education, and you can't have a decent public school. People can't send their kids to school without them, you know, feeling safe and feeling like they're going to come out being able to pass a test. It's not a good thing.
No, and I firmly believe that this whole like tax agenda is steeped in politics versus economics.
Yeah.
And I think it's why we lost Amazon, why we lost Sunset Park. I mean, these are just stupid decisions where we could have created lots of jobs for New York and created better communities and done so many good things. But these politicians, some of them just have an agenda and they want to get more followers on Twitter. And the
problem is that, like, it's also our responsibility. The fact that you have 8.5 million people and only, you know, 800,000 people vote, that's on us, you know.
That is on us.
And so, like, if somebody on city council makes a decision you don't like, then if more of us come out to vote, we could make those changes. They're going to be a lot more careful about their choices, right? They're not going to be like, well, I have this coalition that'll support me. I can make all these decisions to make this one coalition or this one union happy, and I'm guaranteed 40,000 votes or 30,000 votes, whatever they need to get elected. But you know, unfortunately, a lot of people don't vote. And even people who have a lot at stake. I talk to landlords who have, billions of dollars worth of assets, and they have no idea about any of this stuff. They don't know the candidates. They don't know the policies these guys are pushing. It's a very uneducated, voting class, unfortunately. And, it's been so easy. People have always been like, well, government will work itself out. I think in the last, 4, 6, 7 years, we've seen that you cannot just rely on government. I mean, as voters, if we have people out there that are not making the right decisions on our behalf, we're wasting our tax dollars, we have to vote them out. There has to be a price that they pay. And right now, I don't feel like any of these folks feel threatened.
No, I mean, I always say, if you vote, at least you can complain with integrity. If you don't vote, shut up. Don't complain. Don't say a word. You got to get in. I mean, we all have to get involved. We really riled people up and got the agent base involved in voting.
Which is huge. I mean, that's tremendous. And they have such an influence. I mean, the agents, they talk to so many different people. They can educate so many people in their circles. That would be huge.
It matters. Well, we were speaking of challenges, Amir. I want you to spill a little bit of tea with us. Share with us something, I mean, without naming names, can you share with us some of the challenges, or a challenge that, in the last almost 2 decades that was really rough for you, where you were like, oh no, I don't know if I'm good, I don't know what to do, or whatever? Can you share with us something?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously early on, the challenges that I had was that we were covering an industry that was also an advertiser to us, right? So we would be writing negative stories that our advertisers didn't like, and we continued to write those stories. So we would lose advertisers for the sake of our readers. And because we were wholly owned, I mean, the real deal is wholly owned. There's no investors. We only answer to our readers. That's what I tell all of our reporters.
Although, some skeptics, I mean, I've heard this from so many, they're like, oh, this company's an investor for sure. Yeah. Look at their headlines, or this, people think that, although yes. I know that's not true.
Yes. People always, there's a conspiracy always, but there's, at the end of the day, we don't have any investors. So like I always tell my guys that we only have to answer to our readers. So as long as we serve our readers, I'll 100% push it through. And, we've had a lot of people that left, and we did this story with Kevin Maloney, who's a big developer. He was talking to one of the reporters, and he was doing a project with Michael Stern. And so the reporter asked him, he was like, what's the next project you're going to do with Michael Stern? And Maloney was like, if it's up to me, I would never do another deal with that guy, And so he was very. And after the interview, he calls up Catherine Clark, and he goes, well, can you take that part out? We're about to get a $300 million loan for the Steinway Tower. And if the lenders read the real deal, and I don't want them saying that, that's the case. And we're like, well, that's the best part of the interview. Of course, we're not going to take it out. And he had all these threats and stuff, and he pulled out I don't know, $300,000 worth of advertising, which my salespeople hated me for. And the funny part is that the story didn't even get that many views, but we still chose to write that story. And he was very bitter at us for a lot of years, but they always come back. At the end of a year or 2 years goes by, and they'll come back, and they sort of get over it.
I mean, that shows that you stood up for what you had, the courage of your conviction, which I think is really hard. And you must get a lot of pressure where people want you to take this out, take that out. Listen, I've been a little bit in there here and there, so I know that
it's the easiest way to sleep. I tell you, like if you can make the decisions that you get to keep your dignity, and you get to keep your integrity. The loss of the financial loss never matches up to like how you feel about it 2 days later, 3 days later. That first day is like very hard to swallow, but then you're like, man, like I'm a cowboy. That felt good. That felt good to do. So it's, when it's, the money is never worth it, basically.
I love that. Well, talking about real estate and the market, we've been in a buyer's market for years, even before the pandemic. When do you think, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, but when do you think we might switch and start to see more of a seller's market?
Well, this is, it's so interesting. I had a friend in the middle of the pandemic. She was down in Miami, and she ended up buying a place in the West Village. And I was like, is this the right time to buy? I mean, we're in the middle of the pandemic. She was like, I think this is the best time to buy. Like right now is the time to buy because, the prices people are more negotiable. And I really believe that about New York City. At the end of the day, people want to be here. I talk to people from all across America, all across the world, and at the end of the day, they want to move their money to the U.S. And where in the U.S. do they want to move it to? Ideally, if they can afford to, they want to come to New York in some capacity. And so I never panic about New York City real estate. It's always, I feel like it's a living organism, and it somehow always finds a way to survive. After September 11th, the 3 months after September 11th were the worst 3 months in New York City history from the time that we started measuring it. So it was like 1942 and 1946. It was the worst 3 months of New York City history for New York City history. There was like 0 transactions. The 3 months after that 3 months were some of the most active times in New York City history. There's only so many asset classes in the world that you could invest in, right? And real estate is one of the best ones. And New York City happens to have the best of the best. It's the diamond class of that asset class. So I always feel very strong about those really, popular markets in the States where they have a lot of industries and they have a lot of appeal. And look, at the same time, you do see these cities like Detroit that just sort of implode and they just lose themselves. But Detroit is a one industry town. Like some of these places are one industry towns. And New York City is like the sort of the nerve center of every industry: advertising, art, law, real estate, finance, insurance. So all of the stuff is running through New York City. And I think it's going to be a long time. It's not going to happen in our generation. I don't feel like.
No,
so I think there's always a good market for it. And yeah, the price, it's not a seller's market. Maybe, you would know better than I would, but maybe it's not a seller's market this instant. But I think that's also attractive. That's also attractive to get activity going. For the buyers to come in and be able to buy and rent, in this market that's available to them.
Yeah, you mentioned 9/11, similar to the pandemic, where we were shut down for a whole quarter almost, and then now we've had the best second quarter in history. Right. We are it's crazy. From a crisis, springs opportunity, and we're seeing that in all of our regions. Miami, Palm Beach, Connecticut, the Hamptons, Hudson Valley, and so I think it's been a really
Hudson Valley is absolutely insane.
Crazy.
There's a company up there. I think they're part of Coldwell Banker or something, but it's this one, or the Instagram is Upstate Curious. And she takes these old houses and sort of renovates them. And you're not talking about a 10, 20% increase. You're talking about like 50, 80% increases. And she sells them like every week. I've tried to buy something for myself, and I'll see it on Wednesday, and I'll be like, I'll be there on a Saturday to see it because it's an hour and a half away. And 3 times she's called me before the weekend hit. She was like, I'm sorry, it's already gone into contract. And I'm like, this is incredible. Like, what a fast, we're doing a story about her now, actually. And now she started developing her own houses. She started doing these barn Dutch style houses, very, high design, like the sort of Dutch barn style houses. And she's selling those for over $900,000 per house, which is on average 100% more than your average price for properties in that area. And she's selling them. It's interesting to see.
Well, people are looking. Some people want an alternative. The Hamptons is fantastic. I love the Hamptons, all different areas in the Hamptons, but some people want to be, in the Hudson Valley or in Rhinebeck or Woodstock or any of those areas, which is kind of an artist colony. It's, people are in Birkenstocks and ripped jeans and it's much more relaxed. It's a different vibe.
It's so manageable. You don't need a lot of money to go into that market and to be a part of that town, and they're year-round. These are not seasonal homes.
That's right.
They're year-round homes, so there's a lot of appeal to them in that regard too.
I agree. I love it there myself. Well, the role of the real estate agent, as we know, has been very undermined and attacked by legislators as well as aggregators, iBuyers, and certain technologies. The Real Deal has covered many of these topics. What are you hearing about the future of the industry and the effect on agents?
I've talked to a lot of, we're putting together this thing called TRD Pro that has education in it and all sorts of data and different stuff. And, I talked to a lot of brokerage heads and organization heads. And the thing that I keep hearing is that, look, there's only 10% of my brokers that actually work. And I'm blown away by that. And they have so little faith in the other 90%. They're like, at the end of the day, it's only 10% that's generating that, that I'm willing to get a subscription for, that I'm willing to help out for, whatever reason. And the other 90%, they're like, until they make it to that 10%, I don't care about. So, and I think with all these iBuyers and everything else, at the end of the day, like right now, the market is sort of like this, and you have the business that comes into the John Bergers and your big brokers who are like up here, and I feel like that's never going to change. That tip of the market is never going to change. And with the iBuyers and the legislation and all this other stuff, I think it makes it more like this. More people are going to fall on the sideways, but that 10%, that tip of the market, those people who actually get deals done, I think there's always a demand for those people who know the market, who actually put deals together, because some people come into real estate, they're like, real estate's so easy. In 2 days, you made $60,000 because you went and opened the door. Sure. But the fact is that better than anybody, I'm sure your brokers know better than anybody, that's not how it works. I mean, the guys who put the deals together, they go out there, they get the listing, they go out and reach out to those buyers, and they're like, you got to see this, you got to see this. They bring people in there and they make those deals happen. It's never like, oh, I'm sure, of course, there's stuff that people go to open house and they're like, hey, I want to buy this. But for the most part, the deal makers, that 10% of the market that's actually making deals happen, there's always going to be room for those people. There's always going to be a need and demand for that 10%.
But Amir, I mean, it doesn't help that these reality shows like $1 Million Listing, and there's one called Selling Sunset, although they're super entertaining, yeah, they're absolutely not steeped in reality. It's like that Housewives shows. I don't know any mom who has babies who gets up and has a makeup artist put their lashes on and get them ready. Even if they have resources, life is just not like that typically. And so just like those shows are not about reality. Real estate, if you watch what these agents do, and by the way, we have much more than 10% that are very successful, but it's hard work. It takes study and time, and it takes a lot of effort. It's information, it's service, it's so many different pieces. And I mean,
right now there's so much information available that there's absolutely no reason for anybody to make a bad decision. There's no reason for anybody to say, I'm going to go with my gut. There's so much information available and if you're able to provide that for your clients, there's a solid reason to say no to a deal, and there's a solid reason to say yes to a deal in terms of the data that's available. So if, as a broker, if you could take that to a family who's not in real estate but who are interested in a home and say, this is why this deal works for you, or this is why this deal doesn't work for you, there's so much value in that, and that goes beyond, hey, this is a great neighborhood, hey, this is a great building. There's you could list 50 different sort of data points that could support or argue a deal, so, but I agree. I mean, even the guys on those shows, Frederick and Ryan and all those guys, even they came out and they said, these shows are not real, but nobody cares, nobody cares. People still want to,
No, it's fun. It's fun to see people in nice cars and nice clothes, drive around and kick stuff and do things, but it's just fun. It's entertainment, very different than what we do. What do you think about Zillow, Street Easy, those sorts of things? How do you think they impact brokerage?
I think they, obviously they provide a lot of great information and data for the brokerage community. And at this point, they have so much money that they're just throwing things at the wall. They're like, well, let's try design. Let's also include building and construction into a service that we could do. And if it hits, it hits. But if it doesn't, it's okay. We'll just throw $50 million. If it doesn't work out, we'll go on to the next thing. And they have a lot of money to sort of burn through. And the best thing they can do is to sort of invest it in themselves. We don't know if a lot of this stuff is going to work for them. We know what worked for Zillow was like, the premier agent stuff that obviously generated a lot of revenues that worked for them. Will them going into the mortgage business, will it work? I don't know. Them buying houses at fronting money for people to get houses. That remains to be seen, but they have so much money backing them that they can afford to take these risks that get a lot of publicity. And then when they sort of fade away, nobody writes about them. There's so many features that these guys add to their websites. There's a big splash when they come out, and then when they sort of fade away, nobody's like sort of talking about it as much as they should.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to monetize anything that they can. It's never, about consumer first. It's about how can we make money? We'll do it however we have to. And
yeah, that's the web business. How do
yeah.
I scale? How do I, it's not interact one-on-one. It's like, how do I interact with the masses? How can my service, impact the masses?
And who cares about ethics? We don't need those. Anyway, as a publisher, how involved do you get with the day-to-day of content, and do you have influence over any of the content?
I mean, influence, I have my own story ideas that I like to see done. So I pitch those like anybody else. So we have editorial meetings in the morning where, I go in and say, we go around the table, everybody says, I like to see this done, I like to see that done. And then the editors say, well, this is why we should do it or why we shouldn't do it. And I pitch like everybody else. I mean, I get some favors, but I still have to pitch my story ideas. A lot of times they're like, this is not a good idea because we did a story 3 months ago on it, or whatever. I don't read all of our content. We put out 60 pieces of content every day in the different markets. And people always assume I'm reading and editing every piece. And I probably read like 3 stories a day. And those are only the stories that I like to read. That's it.
Let's talk a little bit about Masterclass. This was recently launched. Thank you so much for including me. We had so much.
By the way, you were the first one, so
we sat down together a year ago, and that was in the middle of the pandemic, and it was great. And you have a lot of great people who signed up to do this. How did you come up with this Masterclass idea?
Well, I don't want to get sued, but obviously there's this Masterclass that's out there. But ours is 2 words. Theirs is 1 word. Ours is 2 words. But so a lot of the people that we talked to they love stories about how people did it. Like they just wanted to know how somebody did this and did that. And personally, I learned so much from those conversations because you can skip so much by hearing Bess talk about how you should sell a co-op on Park Avenue. Like all of a sudden, I don't have to go through 10 years of experience to get all these nuances that only Bess would know, or only John Berger would know, only some of your people would know. So I thought there was so much value to that. And, and we were like, well, let's talk to Bess about brokerage. Let's talk to Andrew Farkas about, creating a multi-billion-dollar yacht business or whatever he was working on. So we decided to do these things and teach people about the different sort of the aspects of the business, and to educate people on it, because you sit with one of these market leaders, somebody who's the head of affordable housing for New York and developing for affordable housing. There's so much you learn about about societal issues and cultural issues and why you need it and why it has to be in these neighborhoods, things that we don't normally talk about, or you can just pick Google and read about. So we thought there was a lot of value to learn about those things as real estate professionals, and that's why we decided to do them.
I think that's going to be fun. A lot of people are going to watch that.
I hope so. Yeah, definitely your episode. It was
maybe my mom I know will watch it. That's for sure. So Amir, what kind of stuff do you read to get information? What's your go-to?
I mean, I wake up and read the New York Times. I read the Real Deal newsletters. We have newsletters in 4, 5 cities now, and so I read those just because I have to, sort of. And that's it. I mean, I also use my Google News to get the sort of the news stories that I would be interested in. I used to, there's certain media outlets that I really trust, and I really believe in the sort of coverage that they provide. Like the Washington Post and the New York Times are some of those national newspapers. And then for specific media outlets, there's a lot of great. For me, I prefer to read about publishing and marketing and stuff like that. So there's niche publications, the same way the Real Deal is for real estate, DigiDay is for digital publishers, and other outlets like that for me that talk about the stuff that I work in day to day that have nothing to do with real estate, but how to publish and how to shift and what the new things are. So those are the things that I read.
What about for you? Who are your mentors and why?
It's I hate to say that I don't have mentors, but I started a business on my own early on, and I remember when I first started it, there was a guy who told me, hey, this guy used to own the Baltimore, I forget the daily paper in Baltimore Sun, And he was like, he's a major investor, and you should talk to him. He's, and I reached out to the guy, and his wife, believe it or not, worked at Brown Harris Stevens. And I reached out to him the first year of The Real Deal. And I reached out to him. His name was Robert. And it was on a Saturday. I wanted to leave him a message. I call him, and he picks up his phone. And he's like this big titan of the industry in the media world. And he picks up the phone, and I told him, I was like, I just started this paper. I just want to get some advice and stuff like this. And he was like, well, what are you doing right now? Why don't you come on in? And for the first few years, I really went to this guy for everything. And he was such a great resource. And he would put me in touch. Wow. He's like, you know who you need to talk to? You need to talk to John Malone. And John Malone is like a major media guy, and he made these connections for me to talk to people, which was absolutely invaluable. And I was always very grateful for him. And believe it or not, his wife worked for Brown Harris Stevens, and she was like one of those sort of I hate to say it, but she was like one of those part-time brokers. Yeah. She just loved doing it and stuff like that. And I learned a lot from him, and he was a very kind guy. That it was nice to see that. It was nice to see somebody support me without having anything to gain from it. Like, he was in his 70s, and he had like zero to gain from helping me. There was nothing I could do for him, but he would always make time. He would make the connections and stuff like that, which was invaluable. So as a mentor, I would say Robert was, he was very helpful. He passed away, a while ago.
That shows you an incredible generosity of spirit. The fact that he was willing to agendaless, which, is unusual and so refreshing to see. So you're lucky to find him,
Well, for me, it was mind-blowing, because like when I remember telling my father about it, and he was like, well, what is he getting out of this? What's his game on this? I was like, I don't think anything. I don't know what I have that he could possibly want. Like, he lives on some mansion in the sky. Like, there's nothing I could offer him, really. So
that's a lovely story.
It's funny because, like, like a connection like that, and somebody to come in and help like that, I put that totally towards luck, because.
Yes, listen, that's a lot of life, is preparation and luck when they, that's opportunity, those two. So so, okay. Last but not least, what is next for The Real Deal? What's the next chapter?
Right now, what our focus is to, it's amazing to me that if you're in the real estate business, and I'm talking to more people across the country, that you can go to one place where you can get the major real estate story of that day. If you're a real estate professional, if a major deal happens in Dallas, if you're not reading the Dallas Morning Star, you're not going to find out what that deal is, like, unless you're in Dallas and part of that community. And our thing right now, which we can't hire people fast enough, is to expand to these different markets and be able to sort of afford the coverage that Miami has, New York has to some degree, and be able to be in all these different markets. So we're at the end of the month, we're going to launch in San Francisco, which is the first I'm telling anybody about. So, and then after that, we're going to go to Texas and cover Houston, Dallas, and Austin. But one thing that hits you really hard, living in New York, is that it's hard to hire qualified people outside of New York. In New York, we put up a job ad. I get 50 people to apply for it. 10 of them are qualified. 3 of them are just rock stars, and hopefully we can get one if, like, we're not competing with another media outlet. You do the same thing in Miami. I don't want to say anything bad about Miami, but I do the same thing in Miami. I get like 4 people applying. 2 people won't show up to the job interview. Like, it's really hard to find talent. And the more you go outside of these major markets, the harder it is to find talent. And in Miami, one of the big problems that they have is that you have all these industries that want to move there, because Miami is a hot market right now. But there's not qualified talent that wants to be there, who's moving down there. I think more and more people are moving down there, but not at the pace of the demand. Like, you have these Shutterstock and major tech companies that want to move down there, but the demand for talent is not there. They're importing people to Florida. They're not hiring locals to run those operations.
So we should look for The Real Deal in San Francisco and Texas.
Yes. So we're working on that. We're trying to, we just hired, not just, but a few months ago, as part of the expansion, team. We hired the founding real estate editor of Bloomberg, so he came and joined with us. Well, it's been great. Like when you get those sort of people who understand real estate and they bring in all this knowledge from a different outlet. That's I respect Bloomberg. I respect what they do. So they bring it over here, and they're an asset. They come in and they help a lot, and it's been good. But we honestly cannot find people fast in these markets. That's tough to do.
It's very challenging. Well, you have great people.
In the last 5 years, I've sent 14 people to the Wall Street Journal, and we've lost another 3 or 4 to Forbes, and that's just in the last 5 years. So it's one of the things about us is that we were the first people to sort of pioneer real estate journalism. Like that didn't exist. Like the New York Times didn't have real estate journalists. They had somebody who covered style, and they would be like, go cover this thing. It was never a full-time sort of a person covering the business. Wall Street Journal had only one real estate reporter covering the entire country. So one day he would write about Kansas, and the next day he would write about Florida. And now, obviously, they have a whole team, which is all TRD people. But it's funny because it's the largest asset class in the world, and to think that finance has all these publications and websites and news outlets covering it, and real estate, which is larger than finance, doesn't has the real deal and a handful of other sort of publications that cover it, and that's it. And we really want to expand in a way where we could become like that place where people go to anywhere in the country and get a sense of like what's happening in those markets.
Well, I know we love the real deal. I love also because you guys have a little gossipy element of it, and which is always fun. But you also give good information. Always, stuff that's important, and the agents love it. And we really cherish our relationship with you, and want to thank you for spending some time with me today and talking to us about New York. And Amir, I will see you soon, my friend. You take care of yourself. Thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe.